There's no such thing as sight reading. And when I start my students learning minor keys, first of all, we don't start that until they can spell all of their major keys, because a minor key is a variation of a major key. Everything's a variation of the major scale. But I start them with the traditional modal method. We don't do the parallel method. We don't do parallel minors. That comes to them intuitively later, but the parallel minor method, it's not that it's wrong or you can't get there that way. It's just there's so many steps in the process and so much memorization involved that it's impractical and it blocks your pathway to future concepts. But I start them with the traditional modal method, where we take the major scale and count up 6. So if we have C major scale, we count up 6, and now that's A pure minor, A natural minor, A aeolian. And I have them count up 6, and they know that if they have a natural minor, they can count back 6 and get C major, and those are relative keys. They have the same key signature. And it's a good starting point, and it allows them to interact with other musicians. I'm into literacy, so I want them to understand what other musicians are talking about. But I don't stop there. I further explain to them that if all you do is take the C major scale and start on A, that's not a new key. It's still the C major scale. You can start the C major scale on any note and it's still the C major scale. If you want to make it stop sounding like key of C major and make it start sounding like key of A minor, just changing the starting note is not enough. There has to be some other context. There has to be something that happened before it, something that happened after it, or something that's being played at the same time that makes it sound like... And there's more than one way to do it. There's harmonies and pedal points and chromatic passing tones and all kinds of ways to draw your ear to that A. But if all you do is play the C scale starting on A, you're not in a new key yet. Now, when we move on to harmonic minor, I start off with the traditional method. I say, okay, no sharps, no flats in the key signature, right? A natural minor, right? Take your A natural minor, count up 7, and we're going to raise that note by half step. So the G becomes a G sharp. However, we don't stop there. Why do we need that G sharp, right? Why do we need that? We're not really raising the 7th of A minor. What we're really doing is giving the A its secondary dominant. If you have no sharps, no flats in the key signature, you're in the key of C, your dominant chord is a G7 chord. That's your 5 chord, right? And having the G7 and the tonic C gives you a 5-1 resolution. That's one of the ways to draw your ear to the tonic. Now, if you change that G to a G sharp, you don't have a G7 anymore. So now you don't have a 5-1 resolution to the C. That's going to make C sound less like a tonic, like a note of resting resolution. When we change that G to a G sharp, what we're really doing is putting in an E7 chord. E7 is 5 of A. We're creating a 5 of 6, a secondary dominant leading to the 6. So it's really just a variation of the C major scale, and what we're varying is the placement of the dominant chord. And by changing the placement of the dominant chord, it draws our ear to hear the A as the tonic, because we have an E7. We don't have a G7 anymore. C's not going to sound like a tonic. 5-1 resolution is one of the really strong ways to draw your ear to hearing a note of resolution, to hearing a note as being more important than its surroundings. Now, if we have no sharps, no flats in the key signature, and we change that G to a G sharp, that gives us an E7. That's 5 of A. Well, at that point, your A minor scale doesn't have to start on A anymore, because we've created additional context that draws your ear to the A. So the presence of that E7 is going to draw your ear to the A. A doesn't have to be the starting note anymore. So, in practice, in practical reality, when we're learning music, reading music, if there's no sharps, no flats in the key signature, we're not going to jump through all those hoops and do all those steps. We're not going to count up 6 and call that the relative minor and then take that and count up 7 and raise it. We're not doing all that. No. If we got no sharps, no flats in the key signature, we're just going to look and see if we got a bunch of G sharps. Because if we got no sharps, no flats in the key signature, we're in the key of C major, we're going to have G7 chords. There's not going to be a bunch of G sharps. But if we're in the key of A minor, we need to have E7 chords, so there's going to be a bunch of G sharps in there. So A minor is really just a variation of the C major scale. The thing we're varying is the placement of the dominant chord. Key of A minor is just C major with a raised fifth. My name's Mark Dooley. I've been a private music teacher for 37 years, focused on practical theory and music literacy. If you'd like to hear more, follow me. If you'd like lessons, contact me. If you learn how to read words, you can learn how to read music.